And it's welcome back again to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. I'm here. This time we have Dan here. Hi, Dan.
Hey, everybody.
So just a couple of notes. I've got a cold, which annoyingly, we're recording this in the first week of July. In fact, on the 4th of July, which in the UK this year is an election day. I believe it has some significance in the US, but it's like an awkward thing and we don't talk about that here. So we're not going to mention that. It's election day in the UK and I've got a cold. That's the really important thing. So I'm going to try and keep the coughing and the spluttering to the bare minimum. But if some of that makes it through the edit, I do apologize. You can't catch my cold through the power of podcast, fortunately. On to the other piece of housekeeping, which is our standard piece of housekeeping, which is part of the format of this podcast, as we know, is telling you the format. Here's the format. The format is 3 topics, 30 minutes. 3 topics which are kind of relevant to what we've been writing or discussing or what's been happening in the world. And because Dan's on this time, it has a heavy lean towards IDP because Dan's the man for that. And we couldn't have him on and not talk a lot about IDP and IDP related topics. But because it's the law, that means we are talking a little bit about AI because we have to do that or the police come these days. So we're onto our first topic, which we're calling how to train your LLM, Dan. So I know we're obviously big fans of the How to Train Your Dragon movies. We've seen them all, and you've got a dragon graphic up on screen. For those people who are watching this maybe by YouTube rather than listening to it, Dan's got a graphic that came actually from a blog post, I think from almost a year ago. I think it's from last August, the first version of that. So Dan, how to train your LLM. We talk a lot in general about LLMs as if they're all the same. And I think that's probably because there's the big famous ones that people talk about, and they're the ones that gets benchmarked, and whether it's OpenAI or whether it's Google Gemini, etc. We talk about those, but that's not the full extent of the world of LLMs. And in the world of IDP, there's something quite specific in terms of content and what they're for. So talk us through a little bit about how this works in the world of IDP.
Yeah, sure. Glad to. There's a couple things I want to check off on as we sort of ease into this, Matt. First thing is I woke up this morning and my daughter from Ohio, the USA, had sent me a GIF that has George Washington, the great Revolutionary War commander of the U.S. troops, astride his white stallion, and he's holding a flag, and on the flag it says, England, you have to work today. We get the day off. So here I am once again, a Colorado Yankee in the court of King Charles, having to work on my national holiday, and I just don't know what to say. And the other thing, of course, is Independence Day, as we call it in the United States. Fireworks are always part of that, and so I always get confused when November 5th comes along here in the UK, which is Guy Fawkes Day, and they set off fireworks. So there you go. We got that out of the way. The second thing is I want to sort of ease your concerns a bit that we won't get suddenly the Minority Report police are not going to drop from the helicopter because we didn't say AI, and they know we're about to say AI, right? Because the precogs have told them, which is AI, that we're, so don't worry about that because IDP is intelligent document processing. And guess what the I stands for, Matt?
Well, I'm guessing it's probably the intelligent bit.
Yes, it's artificial intelligence. That's where the I comes from in IDP. So you never have to worry about that when we talk about IDP. Certainly in the last 7 years of Google Transformers. Yeah, so that takes us right into LLMs. Large language models, of course, I'm not going to say anything about them because if you're listening and you don't know what an LLM is, this is a good time to go make some coffee.
Or go back and listen to previous episodes where we have discussed them extensively. So that's a call back to previous episodes.
Yeah, and God have mercy on your soul if you don't know and you're watching.
In many ways, I envy you. I envy you the journey you're about to go on. In another way, I really don't envy you the journey you're about to go on.
Yes. So anyway, where this topic came from, how to train your LLM. First of all, I did have to buy a rather expensive license for that graphic from
I see.
train your dragon. But it really, really, for me, it really gave the picture, the metaphor that I was looking for here. Obviously, the LLM is, you think it's the dragon, don't you? But really, that's not. The dragon is all the unstructured data that you got to get information from in order to train your large language model, especially if you're building one like many companies are today, small language models, domain specific for their industry or for their business. And they have to have data, loads of data. And a lot of that data, I'm not going to even say what percentage of it, is probably stuck in files of different formats, emails, PDFs are a huge, huge repository of all this corporate and business knowledge that is very useful if you want to train your LLM how to speak your domain expertise. So a great example of that is a couple of years ago, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service of the United States, they said, hey, we have all of the instructions on how to fill out your tax forms, citizens, and those are contained in hundreds of PDF files. And those PDF files are large. I mean, we're talking 75 pages for a basic IRS how to fill out your tax form, okay?
Right.
And then you get into all these different really complex tax forms, which I have some experience. And so the IRS said, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a chat bot and you could come and ask the chat bot a natural language query like, am I eligible to fill out form 1050 and get that deduction? Simple question, right?
Yep.
But it's buried literally inside those manuals. The manuals themselves, when they were written by people who also write software manuals, Matt, okay?
Yeah, and they're also people who understood the tax code in the first place.
Yes, exactly. But they don't understand human beings asking questions very well, right?
Right.
And so what the IRS wanted to do, and this was a couple of years ago, so they already were looking at transformers and large language models. They wanted to have somebody train an LLM to be that power chatbot where citizens could come in, ask those questions, and get a plain English answer with a bookmark to the page in the PDF where it came from. Right?
Well, when you're talking about it, Dan, this sounds like a really simple process. I mean, you've explained it very clearly. It's a very simple use case. What could go wrong, right?
Yeah, so the problem was all that information was contained in literally thousands of PDF files, different versions over time. And the thing about the U.S. tax system is it's not like this year there's new tax rules. It's accretive, and it's like the pyramids in Egypt, right?
Oh, right. It's cumulative.
layering and building on the base, and it never ends, right? So there's still stuff in the tax code from 1950. Anyway, a great knowledge management problem if ever there was one.
Yeah.
So the data scientists were like, cool, we can do that. Well, then they discovered that the data that was in those PDFs was really, really difficult to get out, and then to be able to start training. They needed something in between. And so, you know, there happens to be a software technology that can read PDFs, extract data, chunk them up into sections, read tables and graphics and things like it. It's called IDP.
Right.
So some enterprising software companies started up just specifically to take unstructured data and convert that information, extract it, purify it, chunk it up, and make it ready to go into something called a vector database. Once in the vector database, then the data scientists have exactly what they need. And the important thing is it's not just the text, right? It's also the context of that text.
Yeah.
So the chatbot can help understand the difference between, you know, famously in America, we have certain words that mean 5 different things in the English language. And so it's important to have context around that in order for this to work. So there's this company called Unstructured.io that started up a couple of years ago by Brian Raymond and the guys out in Silicon Valley. And they happen to be machine learning geeks. And they said, hey, we can do this. And they entered this murky world of IDP and figured out how to take the technology and their expertise on machine learning and chunking and vector databases and build a system that can do this pretty well. They've raised, I think, $60 million already, and their valuation is through the roof because this has got great value. Now, the rest of the IDP market all those hundreds of vendors that we cover out there.
Yeah, it was 400, I think. You passed the 400 mark.
Yeah, and some of them looked at it and said, "Why? We can do that too." Because we've got like 80% of the basic AI technology to read different document types and extract concepts and do semantics, stuff like that, because that's all part of IDP today. So some of them started to get into this business. What they didn't realize is that you also have to be really, really knowledgeable about data scientists and the language they speak, and the world they live in, and it's totally different, different. And so some of these IDP companies have sort of tried and stumbled a bit. The one that I think is going to make some headway is Hyperscience, who we cover. Hyperscience has made a big move recently. They call it Hyperscaler, I think. And it's basically a big IDP platform that will work in front of your vector database as a classic sort of ETL, extract, transform, and load layer in front of that. So that's the big thing that's happening. It's really not an IDP story, but the actual AI technology is like 80% of what you would see if you take the hood off and look at the engine of a Hyperscience or a Tungsten or a Rossum and all these cool little companies that are doing IDP, what they do. Very, very similar. So kind of net that out. The emergence of LLMs, not the big ones. So OpenAI already has this stuff, right? We're talking about the people who are using open source models, especially now we're seeing Llama, right? And people are using that, and they're starting to build their own, and they're doing smaller versions. Instead of trillions, they're doing billions, and it's starting to look like it might work out. So that's what's happening.
So is the end game
IDP and LLMs? Yeah.
Let's make a quick prediction about where we think the end game is or the direction of travel. Is this towards those 400, probably diminishing over time, those 400 ITP vendors coming on to customers and saying, hey, we've got pre-trained specialist models for you, customer, right? And that's part of our value prop, is our models are good as well as our extraction technology is good. Or is the expectation, hey, we're going to come along and we're going to come along with an empty vector database, and part of our prop is going to be doing the training for you, customer, specifically as part of the onboarding? Is it a combination of those two, or is it likely to be one of those directions you think that make a prediction, put a stake in the ground, Dan?
Yeah, oh boy. So I think there's only going to be a handful of existing IDP companies, maybe 10, that can handle making this change, because a lot of companies that make IDP software haven't built out a platform that can work at scale like this, because this is different. A typical IDP application is, okay, we're going to now process the invoices. And maybe there's a purchase order in there as well, okay?
Yeah.
When you do this to train your LLM, you have to take all the unstructured data, all the information that's sitting out in those files and formats, and it could be any topic, any type, any style. So it's a magnitude higher of a problem to solve than a typical processing pipeline that we see in business today. That's why I think there's only a handful of companies that have both the platform, because this has to be able to scale and go large very quickly, and also the team, because this is going to be very much you're selling to data scientists, you're selling to that world, and that's totally different than trying to sell to the business manager who's running the accounting department, right? Or the guy running the shipping department who needs to scan and read some shipping documents. Totally different go to market there. So I think for those reasons, we're only going to see a handful of companies do that. But that's all right. The rest of the companies, there's plenty of greenfield still out there for them to chase.
Okay, so what we're talking about, the number of companies that in the marketplace, and I mentioned you recently got to 400. I'll be interested to see by the time that maybe the 2025 version of the IDP marketplace comes out, where you're running to. Is it going to be more or less, or whether we'll start to see some more attrition there, or some more acquisition, which I guess is a good form of attrition. But something, the second topic you wanted to talk about was the usual suspects here, and I think that's what you're saying here up on screen is a photograph we probably haven't cleared from that movie, so don't sue us. And suggesting actually that there's a there tends to be a focus on a small number of noisy vendors, but as you said, within that 400, there is all sorts of specialisms, whether they be industry or vertical or geography or language, right? So just expand a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So first of all, I've always wanted to use something from The Usual Suspects, which is one of my favorite movies. Kaiser Soze, if you know the movie, that character has become sort of mythical in different settings. But it's always fascinated me. And so I finally got to, and yes, you can buy a license of that image, which I did.
Oh, there you go.
It's surprisingly affordable. Surprisingly affordable. But yeah, it serves as a great metaphor, I think, because what's happened, and permit me to go on a bit of a rant here, if I can,
sure.
Our business, the industry analyst business. I'm an industry analyst. You're more of a I think you're more of a end user application analyst in the way you look at it. But I'm sort of like a pure industry analyst in terms of vendors, right? Because that's my background and I understand the dynamics really well. And one of the things that happens is several times a year, different analyst firms put out, let's call them, it's a beauty contest, okay?
Sure.
And so they name the prettiest person, and then they sort of give out consolation prizes for the one that had the nicest suit, or swam the fastest, or played the piano best, or whatever, like that. But it's a beauty contest, and the way it works is, because I used to be a CMO and I used to do this with analysts. The analysts send you a spreadsheet, and it's a checklist, okay? And it's like an RFI sort of. Do you do this? Does your product do that? Check. Are you in these vertical markets? Check. What percentage of your business? Check, right? And so it's the vendor fills this form out, sends it back to the analyst. And not all the vendors do that because it takes time. And there's also this sort of little pay to play thing in the background that discourages some of the vendors who just may not be able to afford to do it.
Sure.
What you end up with is a bunch of reports that come out every year. And I call it the, I hope we don't get in too much trouble, the Magic Zone Scape Wave Peak report. And there's also a new one, the Matrix, too. So let's throw that in there. And the problem with those is they tend to cover the same vendors.
Yeah.
And the same vendors are always in the leader quadrant. That almost never changes. And then they've got the aspirants and the aspirants, whatever. It's almost like the movie Animal House, which is going way back here. When they go to pledge the fraternity, and the fraternity brothers look and they sort of vet everybody, and they put the also rans and the has-beens, the ugly kids, poor kids, into the side room, and you go sit over there, right? It's sort of like that, unfortunately, our industry. I don't like it. I never did as a vendor. So I was poking a little bit of fun here at it by saying, you got to look beyond the usual suspects. If you're a buyer, you've got a business process, you've got content that you've got to read and understand, and you'd like your machines to do it as part of the business process. It's called intelligent automation. It's a good idea, right? So you're looking around, and these reports, what they do is they say, okay, these 5 companies are the leaders. Well, are they? Yeah, I mean, sometimes, but there's like 100 other software companies out there that probably could solve your problem and do it equally as well, cost less, and be easier to work with. But they never make it into these beauty contests for one reason or another, and they're left out. We cover that at Deep Analysis. We're sort of like the analyst firm that talks to everybody. And I talked to a company called Cognaze, and that's what spurred this writing this blog and talking about this matter. Cognaze had never appeared on one of these reports, but yet they're kicking butt. They got a really good platform for financial statements, and they're in New York City. Good place to be for that, right? And the technology is sound, and they know what they're doing, right? And they got customers. So that's an example, and I could give you dozens of others that we've covered and we write about that never show up on these reports unless somebody puts a little money forward, a lot of money in some cases, to get on these things. So that's my rant about to all you users out there, all you end users and all you investors, those reports, take it with a grain of salt. Well, what about the deep analysis report? Aren't you guys the same? Not really. In my IDP report, the appendix has a list of 350 software companies, everybody that we found that makes something with IDP in it. And what we do is we look at innovation, and we do choose some companies that we feel are more innovative in certain markets than others.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the rest of them are bad. They're not like challengers. They're good too. And that's kind of our democratic approach, I guess I'd say, since it's Independence Day and Election Day in the UK. We try to give everybody an equal footing here at Deep Analysis. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's an element of from a buying point of view, and I've spent as much time on the sell side as I have on the buy side across my 30 years now in software. There's a certain amount with analyst reports where customers are basically offshoring risk, right? Spending a lot of money buying a thing, in this case software, is a risky thing. It can make or break your career, right? If you spend a lot of money and it doesn't give the eventual benefits that you want, that's a career damaging thing. By leaning on analyst material and saying, are these people in the top right hand corner? And you're right, Dan. Once you're in the top right-hand corner, you literally got to go out of business to fall out of it, because one of the criteria for the top right-hand corner for most big analyst firms is the number of inquiries they get about the vendor. Who gets the most inquiries? Well, the ones in the top right-hand corner, right? So you can't fall out of it. You've literally got to die to fall out of that. So
it's a flywheel once you get in.
So, but it allows people to go, hey, well, one of the things that's offshoring my personal risk in recommending this purchase of this thing is they're in the top right-hand corner. So it allows me to feel better about my purchase. Therefore, it helps, grease the wheels of the commercial side of the software industry. And of course, that allows them to shed a little bit of money off, or quite a lot of money off, to the analyst firms to make sure that that top right-hand corner position stays legitimate. So it is like, you could say, a virtuous circle,
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. That would all be legit if the analyst firm actually really knew the software well enough to make an informed decision for those buyers. And that is something that obviously I feel very strongly about.
Sure.
There are a few analysts that come from product management backgrounds in the software industries that they cover. Most of them are not, of course. They're generalists that came from other parts of the industry. And I'm sorry, they can easily be swayed by a vendor presentation, is all I'm going to say about that. And Matt, it is true. I am somebody whose companies were never the leader in the Gartner quadrant. We were never number one.
Yeah.
Any company I ever worked for. So yeah, maybe I got a bone to pick.
True. And same with me. I've spent a lot of time being a challenger. I've been an up and comer. I've never been in the top right hand corner. It must be a lovely to be in that rarefied air on that side of the velvet rope. Must be lovely. So you're right. I'm probably carrying a certain amount of scar tissue from that side of it. So talking about scar tissue, onto our final topic 3 of this edition, the 17th edition of the podcast. And as ever, all the references to articles and research will all be in the show notes. They may be below where you're listening right now. If not, where you're reading this or listening to this right now. If not, then they'll be on the website very shortly. So topic 3. I, Dan, Alan, all of us spend a lot of our time getting briefings from vendors. And some of those vendor briefings are amazing, and some of them are awful, and most of them are actually somewhere between the two, where they are good bits and bad bits. Last time, previous episode, Alan and I had a little pick one good and one bad thing from conference agendas, and I thought, as Dan has probably more vendor briefings than all of us put together right now, I'd ask him to pick out one thing that you should definitely do on an analyst briefing, one thing you definitely shouldn't do on an analyst briefing, and I'll do the same. And I think let's start with a positive. let's start with something that you should definitely do on an analyst briefing, Dan. What's a definite do?
Oh, show me a real world example of how a customer is using the software, and be specific. You would think that type of storytelling would be something that everybody knew.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a problem with vendors in general, which I probably propagated in my day. We get briefings, right? And the typical pitch deck,
yeah,
is the same almost without variation sometimes. You start off with that slide, and then you go to that slide, and that slide is that slide. It's perpetuated by Silicon Valley. There's a bunch of podcasts, and people will tell you how to do your pitch deck, but they're all the same model, right? Okay, so we get through that, right? Rarely do I come across a vendor that says, hey, we did this with our software, and I want to show you how it actually works to solve a business problem.
Cool. Yeah.
And when that happens, I write about it. I say nice things about them, if obviously the demo makes sense, and it always does. So that's a real positive thing that I say to every vendor: start with storytelling.
Yep. We
saw a problem, and here's how we solved it using AI. And let me show you what that looks like as best I can, without showing you private information, as best I can. And show me, vendor, that first of all, you understand that customer's business language.
Yep. Yep.
Very, very important, because if you don't, we will suss that out pretty quickly, won't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So my definite do is a variation on that, and probably because I've spent a portion of my career, doing implementation projects. One of the things I like to see, and I try to ask for is, hey, when you do these customer projects, talk me through what an implementation looks like. What are the phases? What does it take? Is it 1 month, 3 months, 5 months? What parts does the customer do? What parts do you do? Maybe what parts do your system integrators or other third parties do? Talk us through that. What have you learned from that? So it's similar, but I'm talking specifically about, hey, the day after we're married, what's our life going to be like? And the part of that is going to be how are we going to actually work out our relationship? Because that's the thing I think I'd like to be able to articulate when I'm talking in the future about you to other people, is saying, hey, this is what it's going to be like being in a relationship with these people. This is how they work. These are the skills that they bring. These are the skills they bring from outside. And these are the skills they expect you as a customer to bring to the project themselves. And I think understanding that kind of thing is a definite goodie to be able to articulate that. Let's just talk a little bit about things you shouldn't do. So pick out one thing that maybe grinds your gears a little bit, that everybody does, or maybe some people will do, that you wish they didn't. And we're talking specifically not about pitches to investors or pitches to customers. We're talking about pitches to analysts. What's a definite?
Oh, right. Yeah. So this is going to be very specific to
please do
what I cover. My main beat, intelligent document processing. So just about every briefing starts off with, we're building a platform that can understand any document type. That's the typical, right?
Yep.
But 90%, maybe 95% of what they show me is invoice.
Right.
95% of these people will demo an invoice first. And I'm like, 1995 called and it wants its invoice back. Okay, because I was around in 1995 when we were starting to look at invoices and saying, how do we read these and how do we format the output and stuff like that, right? That's been going on for 30 years. We're not there yet. Show me something else. Show me another document type. Oh, please, please. So just recently I had a briefing and they said, well, CTO is going to give you a demo. And I knew this company, I'd read about it, and I thought, oh no, here come the invoices. All right. Well, he completely blew me away. Instead, he said, we have a customer. They're the police department, and they have these body cam videos.
Right.
And they needed somebody to extract all the text from those body cam videos and match it up with our CRM system.
Yeah.
So that we could get the data who got arrested and maybe look up and see if they have a record, and do that in, not real time, but pretty close to real time.
Yeah.
And so we built a solution that can extract the data from those videos and put it into the CRM. And I went, wow, okay, yeah. Sure. Now that is transformative.
Yeah.
That is different. That's something that we probably couldn't do very well 3 or 4 years ago. It would have taken a heck of a lot more to make that happen 3 or 4 years ago. But now they figured out how to use some LLMs to power that, some computer vision stuff, and wow. And that's not their business. I think they've sold one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're hoping that now, we can really move into that direction. And it's not just about document processing anymore, you see. So to me, that was a wow. Don't show me invoices, IDP people, unless that's your business. If you're an invoice processor, please show me invoices. Otherwise, don't. Show me something else. Go ahead, Matt.
So we could summarize by they showed you a bit of surprise and delight. But a surprise and delight to a marketer is I guess a good thing. They gave you something that you weren't expecting. Something I began, and on to my, just to wrap up my sort of definitely don't, which is a little bit of something that crops up a little bit, which is why I said, hey, remember who you're pitching to here. You're not pitching to investors. You're not pitching to prospective customers. You're pitching to analysts. You know what I don't want to see? I don't want to see what other analysts think of you, right? I do not want to see a slide that says, hey, this firm says we're number one. This firm says we're number one. This one says we're in the top right-hand corner of their 2x2. I don't care, right? I'm a separate analyst from a separate company. You're telling me what my competition thinks of you. Don't save the slide. Save the slide. Don't talk to me about it. And it's very personal. It's very much a analyst-specific thing. But there's a million things you can tell me that are really useful. Because don't forget, I'm going to be writing about this. And one thing I can guarantee I'm never going to write about is my competition and what they think of you.
Oh, that's a great one, Matt. I just had that happen the other day, and it was sort of inadvertent. They were trying to convince me that their total available market, TAM, this mythical beast called TAM out there.
Yeah,
they were trying to convince me that they were leaving the little itty bitty IDP market and coming into the AI workforce enabled market.
Which is definitely a real thing.
Yeah, and so of course the slide had the IDP market, it was this big. And then instead of footnoting it with the deep analysis number of the size of the market, they used somebody else's.
Yeah.
Which was totally wrong, so off that it was laughable. And then of course the AI work enabled market was Gartner. And so I let that one go. I let that slide. I said, okay, guys, I know you're a startup here, but maybe you don't want to do that sort of thing in the future. Number one, it's wrong, and it's demonstrably wrong. And number two, I'm an analyst.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm with you on that one. All you vendors out there and all you AR people, I tell you what, this is free advice that's worth a lot of money. So we just basically, helped you here.
Well, we realized that these little topics at the end, last time about conferences and this one about briefings, it's very personal. It's very us being a little bit precious, a little bit self-centered, but this is, as Dan said, genuine advice here to help you. Take the slide out. You don't have to talk about it. Definitely talk about how you do implementations. Definitely talk about customer benefits. And if you can throw some surprise and delight into the demo and imagine what we haven't seen. And if you're Dan, you've seen 400 IDP demos at least. So you've probably seen some invoices before. And there's a wearing insight into Dan's life. 400 IDP demos. Anyway, that's it. We're up against time. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for joining. I know that the episodes that you come along always get a better viewing figure than the ones with me and Alan, and we're not sore about that at all. But I can assure you that they're always the top performing ones in our ratings. Next time, though, it will be me and Alan, and it'll be 3 more topics and 30 minutes to discuss them in. Thanks for joining us on the We Love Ugly Data podcast. Thanks for joining, Dan.
Hey, Matt. The pleasure is always.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for joining again. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.